They told us civilization began in Mesopotamia, that the first temples were built beside the Tigris and the Nile, that history started 6,000 years before Christ. But what if they were wrong? Long before Egypt raised its pyramids, before Sumer wrote its first words, there was another world, hidden beneath the sands of time, a place where humans carved stone before they even discovered farming, a place that rewrote everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Its name is Göbekli Tepe, the lost kingdom of the dawn, the civilization older than history itself. This is not just the story of a forgotten people, it's the story of us, where we came from, and the truth our ancestors buried for 11,000 years. Subscribe now and join the journey into the world's first great mystery, before history began. Long before the world knew the glory of Egypt, the wisdom of Mesopotamia, or the philosophy of Greece, there was another world, a forgotten dawn of humankind, a time when cities did not yet exist, when writing had not yet been imagined, and when the stars were humanity's only calendar. In this forgotten age, more than 11,000 years ago, a small group of people gathered on a lonely hill in southeastern Anatolia, what we now call Turkey. The hill was quiet, covered in wild grasses, surrounded by plains where gazelles, wild boars, and lions once roamed freely. This place would one day be known as Göbekli Tepe, the Hill of the Navel. At that time, humans were still wanderers. They hunted animals and gathered fruits, seeds, and roots to survive. They built no cities, no farms, no permanent homes. Yet something extraordinary began here. Something that would change the course of human history forever. No one knows what first drew them to this hill. Perhaps it was the view of the endless horizon, or maybe it was something spiritual, a sense that this land was sacred. The people began to carve huge stones, taller than any person and heavier than any animal could move alone. They shaped these stones into towering pillars, each one forming a circle, like open temples beneath the sky. Each pillar was decorated with symbols: foxes, vultures, snakes, and mysterious human-like figures. The carvings were precise, almost artistic, even though metal tools did not yet exist. The builders used simple stone tools, yet the result was astonishing. It was as if their hands were guided by something greater than themselves, by a vision or belief beyond survival. The air around Göbekli Tepe must have been filled with the rhythm of stone being struck, the sound of chanting, and the firelight flickering against the carvings at night. These early humans were doing something no one had ever done before. They were building a place of worship, not for shelter, but for spirit. It challenges everything we once thought we knew. Historians used to believe that agriculture came first, then religion, then civilization. But Göbekli Tepe tells a different story. Here it seems faith came first, the idea that there was something divine beyond the human world. And that belief united people, giving them a reason to gather, to build, and to dream together. Over generations, the site grew. More pillars were raised, each one placed with purpose, aligned with the stars and the movements of the sun. It became a cosmic center, perhaps the very first temple complex in human history. Imagine the scene thousands of years ago. Hundreds of men and women coming from faraway valleys, carrying stones and offerings. Fires burned through the night. Priests, or perhaps shamans, told stories of gods, spirits, and ancestors. People danced around the circles of stone as dawn broke over the hills, painting the carvings in gold. For them, this was more than a monument. It was a message to the heavens, a declaration that humanity had awakened. Yet, the mystery deepens. After centuries of use, these people did something no historian can fully explain. They buried their sacred temples. Each stone circle was carefully covered with earth and rubble, as if to protect it, or to seal away its power. Then they left. Göbekli Tepe slept beneath the soil for millennia, hidden from every empire that came after, Babylon rose and fell. Egypt built its pyramids. Greece discovered philosophy. And still the hill remained silent. Who were these builders? Where did they go? Why did they bury their own masterpiece? Some scholars believe they were the ancestors of the first farmers, the people who learned to tame wheat and domesticate animals soon after. Others think they were a forgotten tribe who disappeared into myth. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. They were not primitive. They were visionaries, dreamers who saw meaning in the stars and purpose in the stones. Göbekli Tepe stands as a reminder that civilization did not begin with cities, but with connection, with the human need to understand our place in the universe. As the sun set over the Anatolian hills, the last builders of Göbekli Tepe looked upon their creation. The wind blew gently across the plain, carrying the scent of fire and dust. Perhaps they believed their gods would now dwell among the stones, watching over their people forever. Then they walked away, leaving behind the first great mystery of mankind, a mystery that would not be uncovered again for more than 10,000 years, until modern archaeologists brushed away the earth and revealed a civilization older than history itself. And this was only the beginning. The morning sun rose over the Anatolian hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. From the height of Göbekli Tepe, the land stretched endlessly, a sea of wild grass and rolling plains. It was here, long before writing, kings, or empires, that humanity's first great transformation began. Generations had passed since the first builders raised the sacred pillars. The people of the hill no longer wandered aimlessly across the earth. The rhythm of their lives had changed. They began to settle near the sacred site, building small shelters of stone and clay. Where once there were only fires and temporary camps, now there were villages, the first sparks of human community. The people no longer lived by the hunt alone. They began to tame the wild grain that grew in the valleys below, einkorn wheat, one of the ancestors of modern crops. By collecting seeds and planting them, they discovered something astonishing. The earth could give back more than it took. It was the birth of agriculture, and with it, the first sense of stability. The ceremonies at Göbekli Tepe still continued, but their meaning had grown. What began as a worship of spirits and animals now turned into something larger, a faith that united the people beyond blood or tribe. Each carving on the great stone pillars told a story: a serpent, a fox, a crane, a scorpion. To the people, these were not merely animals. They were symbols of the invisible world, the bridge between the human and the divine. The temple was now not just a place of gathering, but the heart of a growing civilization. Elders and spiritual leaders began to take on new roles. Some guided the rituals, others managed the storage of grain and food. Slowly, leadership emerged, not of warriors but of organizers, teachers, and priests. Human life was changing in ways never seen before. Cooperation replaced isolation. Trade began to flow across the plains. Obsidian from the mountains, shells from distant rivers, and tools carved with care. These early exchanges were the beginning of economy, the invisible web that would one day connect nations. The people learned to shape clay into vessels, to grind grain into flour, and to bake the first forms of bread. Around their homes, dogs lay beside the fires, no longer wild, but companions. The bond between human and animal deepened, mirroring the unity they believed existed between earth and sky. Göbekli Tepe itself grew into something extraordinary. Each new generation added another circle of stones, larger and more intricate than the one before. The carvings became more symbolic, filled with meaning and mystery. The site transformed into a center of pilgrimage, where neighboring tribes came to offer gifts, share stories, and celebrate the cycles of the moon and stars. The temple was alive with sound, the deep beat of drums made from animal hide, the haunting rhythm of flutes, and the chanting of voices carried by the wind. By night, fires flickered against the tall pillars, casting long shadows that danced like spirits of the ancestors. This was the classical era of the Göbekli people, the height of their creativity, spirituality, and social harmony. They had no written language, yet they spoke through art and stone, leaving messages that would endure for thousands of years. But even at their height, change was coming. Nature itself was shifting. The world grew warmer, and the rains began to fall differently. The animals they once hunted in great numbers began to move farther away. To survive, the people had to adapt once again. Some of them began to move down from the sacred hill, bringing with them their newfound knowledge, how to plant seeds, how to store food, and how to live together. They built new settlements near rivers and fertile valleys. From Göbekli Tepe, the idea of community spread outward like ripples in a pond. Though they carried with them the teachings of their ancestors, the great temple on the hill began to lose its daily use. The ceremonies became rarer, the fires dimmer. The younger generations had new priorities: survival, growth, and building new homes in new lands. Yet the spirit of Göbekli Tepe remained in their hearts. Its influence traveled far, echoing across time. The idea that humanity could build for something greater than itself, that we could shape stone not only for shelter, but for meaning, became the seed from which all future civilizations would grow. The people of Göbekli Tepe had done something no one else had achieved before them. They had turned belief into structure, and structure into society. They had laid the foundation for everything that would come. For Sumer and Egypt, for Greece and Rome, for every temple, pyramid, and city that would one day rise from the earth. As the sun set over the hill for the 1000th time, an old shaman looked upon the sacred stones and whispered a prayer to the stars. He did not know that his people had started a chain reaction that would never end. He did not know that thousands of years later, people from across the world would uncover his creation and marvel at what he and his ancestors had built. But perhaps, in that final moment of twilight, he understood something simple and eternal: that the world had changed forever, and that humanity had taken its first step into civilization. The winds that swept across the plains of ancient Anatolia carried more than dust and pollen. They carried change. Far beyond the horizon, the world itself was awakening. Rivers carved new paths, forests spread, and humanity began to move. It had been many centuries since the first stones of Göbekli Tepe were raised toward the sky. The sacred hill still stood proud under the sun, a crown of carved pillars overlooking the world below. But now, the people were no longer alone. Across the lands, other tribes had begun to settle. From the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates to the distant edges of the Levant, human groups were growing, each one discovering new ways to live, to build, and to dream. The people of Göbekli Tepe were no longer just hunters or farmers. They had become traders, storytellers, and teachers. Their reputation spread like fire through the grasslands. Nomadic groups from faraway places heard whispers of the Hill of the Gods, where the stones spoke and the stars were read like sacred books. At first, the visitors came in peace. They brought gifts: obsidian blades from the eastern mountains, seashells from distant shores, and pigments of red and black used to paint ritual symbols. In return, the priests of Göbekli Tepe offered them blessings and knowledge: how to grind grain, how to build homes, how to read the sky for signs of rain and harvest. Through these exchanges, a network of culture began to grow, connecting people who had never before met. The sacred hill became a meeting place, not just for worship, but for trade, diplomacy, and shared learning. Yet with these new visitors came new beliefs. The gods of the hill, once honored through animal carvings and sacred fire, now met new spirits, new names, new symbols, and new ways of prayer. The old ways began to mix with the new, creating something both beautiful and fragile. Some among the elders welcomed the change. They believed that the gods were revealing themselves in many forms. that truth was not bound to one tribe or one name. But others grew uneasy. They feared that the old traditions would fade, that the sacred stones would lose their meaning beneath the weight of foreign influence. In the moonlight, debates echoed through the village courtyards. "Are we the keepers of the gods?" one asked, "or are we only their messengers?" The arrival of new people also brought new challenges. Not all visitors came seeking peace. Some came with envy. The hill, with its growing abundance and fame, attracted those who desired what the people of Göbekli Tepe had built: food, tools, and sacred prestige. Though no great wars were fought, there were moments of tension: stolen grain, broken promises, misunderstandings between tribes. The people of the hill had to learn the delicate balance of trust and caution. For the first time, they began to build walls, not to keep out beasts, but to mark boundaries, the earliest signs of territory and ownership. The influence of outsiders also brought new technologies. From the east came sharper tools and new techniques for carving stone. From the south, new types of seeds and ways of storing them. These innovations helped the people adapt to the changing world, a world that was becoming both more connected and more complex. Under the flickering light of the sacred fires, the high priests of Göbekli Tepe began to see the world differently. The constellations above seemed to move in strange patterns, and the old songs no longer sounded the same. The once simple ceremonies became elaborate festivals, a blending of rituals, chants, and dances from many lands. The hill that had once stood alone had now become a crossroads of civilization. And while that brought prosperity, it also stirred questions about identity and purpose. Who were they now? The children of the hill, or the citizens of a greater world? One legend tells of a priest who stood before the central pillar at dawn. He raised his arms to the sky and said, "The gods are not bound to stone or fire. They travel with those who believe." Those words marked a quiet revolution. It was a realization that would echo through the ages, that ideas could travel farther than people and that faith could evolve without fading. But as the world grew larger, the heart of Göbekli Tepe grew quieter. Many of its builders' descendants began to leave, carrying fragments of their knowledge to the fertile valleys below. There, they would plant the seeds of new cultures, the ancestors of Mesopotamia, of the Levant, and beyond. Göbekli Tepe, once the center of all things, slowly became a memory. Its stones remained, its carvings endured, but its crowds grew fewer. The songs of the priests faded into the wind. Still, even as the people moved on, the influence of the sacred hill endured in every field they sowed, in every story they told, and in every temple they would one day build. The spirit of Göbekli Tepe, the belief that the divine could be shaped by human hands, would live on, passed down from generation to generation. The winds from beyond had come, and with them the world had changed again. Humanity had learned to share, to adapt, and to dream beyond the horizon. The age of isolation was ending. The age of connection had begun. The morning mist rose over the Anatolian hills, glowing with the pale light of dawn. Göbekli Tepe stood silent now, its great stone pillars weathered by time and wind. But though the sacred hill had grown quiet, its spirit lived on, carried in the hearts of the people who had once gathered there. From those people came the next great transformation of humankind, the age of growth. As generations passed, their descendants spread across the fertile plains and river valleys. The lessons learned on the sacred hill, unity, organization, and shared purpose, became the foundation for something far greater than any one tribe could imagine. In the valleys below, near the great rivers that flowed through the land, small villages began to rise. They were built from mud brick and stone, with walls smooth and strong and roofs covered in reeds. Smoke drifted from hearths as families cooked the grain they had grown from seeds first harvested near Göbekli Tepe. This was the first wave of true settlements, permanent homes, places where generations would live and die under the same sky. The people learned to shape the land itself. They dug channels to bring water to their fields and discovered how to store grain in clay jars to last through winter. They domesticated more animals, goats, sheep, and cattle, and learned to use their strength for labor and transport. For the first time, humans were not at the mercy of nature, but working in harmony with it. Trade routes spread like veins across the earth. Stone from the mountains, shells from the sea, and obsidian from distant lands flowed through these new communities. People no longer lived only for survival. They lived to create. In this new era, craftsmanship flourished. The people carved figurines of humans and animals, painted murals of their myths, and wove the first patterned cloth. Art became a language, a way to express belief, beauty, and identity. The lessons of Göbekli Tepe were clear. To build something lasting, people must build together. And so they did. Villages grew into towns, and towns began to connect through trade and kinship. A traveler could walk for days and still find the same traditions, the same stories, and the same respect for the unseen powers that watched over the earth. The shamans and elders who once served the gods of the sacred hill now became leaders and teachers in these new communities. They guided the people not only in ritual, but in daily life, in planting, building, and decision-making. Slowly, society began to take shape. Some people became farmers, others builders, others traders or artisans. The world was no longer a wilderness of tribes. It was becoming a network of roles and responsibilities. It was also in this era that humans began to look beyond mere survival and ask larger questions. Who are we? Why are we here? The night sky, once worshipped through the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, was now mapped with memory and meaning. The stars became guides, calendars, and symbols of destiny. Festivals marked the turning of the seasons. Songs celebrated birth and harvest. This was humanity's awakening of culture. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was not in what they built, but how they thought. The people who once saw the gods only in stone now began to see the divine in life itself, in the seed that grew into grain, in the river that gave water, in the warmth of fire that turned night into day. The world had become sacred in its entirety. From the echoes of Göbekli Tepe, the people had learned to trust the future, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. That hope, simple yet powerful, became the heartbeat of human progress. As centuries passed, the settlements grew larger and more complex. Some became centers of innovation, where pottery, farming tools, and woven textiles reached new levels of sophistication. In these places, early forms of trade administration appeared, the ancestors of what would one day become government and economy. These early societies began to measure time, record trade, and develop symbols, the first seeds of written language, and with each innovation, humanity stepped further away from the wild and closer to civilization. It was a time of prosperity and learning, of discovery and growth. But with growth came new challenges. Competition for land, resources, and power. Even so, the people remembered the wisdom of their ancestors. Balance sustains life. The harmony between human and nature, between tribe and tribe, was what allowed the world to flourish. As the sun set over the plains, the descendants of Göbekli Tepe looked upon their fields, golden waves of wheat stretching as far as the eye could see. They could not have known that these humble beginnings would one day lead to cities, empires, and histories that would fill the world. But they did know one truth, passed down through the ages, that every stone, every seed, every hand joined in work was part of something eternal. They were no longer the builders of temples. They were the builders of civilization itself. And thus began the age of growth, when humanity learned not just to survive, but to shape its own destiny. The world had grown bright. Villages had become towns. Fields had turned golden with grain, and the people who once wandered the plains now called the earth their home. Humanity, at last, had learned how to live together, how to build, to trade, to dream. But no dawn lasts forever. From the same horizon that once brought new hope, darker winds began to rise. At first, it came quietly. The rains grew unpredictable. The rivers, once generous and calm, began to flood without warning, then shrink into cracked beds of dust. The balance between humankind and nature, the harmony that had sustained life since the days of Göbekli Tepe, began to falter. The people could not understand it. For generations they had honored the earth, the sky, and the spirits. They had sung to the stars, built altars to the unseen, and lived in gratitude for the gifts of the land. Yet now the soil refused to yield. The herds wandered away. The world itself seemed to turn against them. It was the beginning of the first great crisis. Communities that had once thrived together began to compete for the same fertile ground. Water became precious. Food became uncertain. The bonds of trust, once strong as stone, began to crack. In the towns that had grown from the wisdom of Göbekli Tepe, leaders gathered to decide what must be done. Some said the gods were angry. Others said the seasons had simply changed. But beneath their arguments, fear spread like smoke through dry grass. For the first time, humanity faced scarcity, not from predators or wild beasts, but from the earth itself. Still, the people endured. They built deeper wells, crafted new tools, and experimented with new kinds of grain that could survive the shifting climate. Their ingenuity kept them alive, but not without cost. As the generations turned, differences between groups became sharper. Some villages grew rich through trade or innovation, while others struggled to survive. The idea of ownership, of land, of resources, of power began to take root. In the shadow of the sacred hill, the descendants of Göbekli Tepe's builders watched as cooperation slowly gave way to competition. There were no great wars, no armies, no kings, not yet. But there were small conflicts, whispered disputes that marked the first fractures in human unity. Where once people built together, they now built apart. Where once they shared the harvest, they now guarded it. The priests and elders tried to remind the people of their shared origins, of the time when all tribes gathered under the open sky to honor the same stars. "We were one," they said. "We were born of the same earth." But fear is a hard teacher. The rituals that had once celebrated unity became rituals of pleading. Offerings grew larger, more desperate. Fires burned through the night as priests prayed for rain, for forgiveness, for renewal. Some turned away from the old gods entirely, seeking new answers. They began to build new shrines, smaller and simpler, closer to their homes. Faith, once universal, began to fragment, each community seeking its own truth. And yet, amid the struggle, human resilience did not fade. In the lowlands, people invented irrigation channels, guiding what little water they had to the fields. In the highlands, they terraced the slopes to plant grain where no seed had grown before. New tools were shaped, new methods discovered. Necessity became the mother of invention. Though the world had grown harsh, humanity's spirit refused to break. It was during this time that people learned to record their lives, not yet with words, but with symbols carved into stone and clay. These early markings told stories of survival, of gratitude, and of loss. Through hardship, the first memory of history was born. But every generation that passed seemed to move a little farther from the old hill, from Göbekli Tepe, where their ancestors had first reached for the divine. The sacred site still stood, half buried and silent, a forgotten monument to an age when faith had united all people. Now, faith had splintered. Yet, in a strange way, the lessons of that ancient place endured. The people still built, still dreamed, still searched for meaning, proof that the flame of civilization could flicker, but never truly die. By the end of this age of crisis, humanity had changed forever. They had learned endurance. They had learned adaptation. They had learned that survival was not given freely. It had to be earned, season by season, with hands, hearts, and hope. And in the quiet that followed, as the earth began once more to heal, a new chapter waited to begin. The people had faced the test of the natural world and survived. Now they would face the test of their own creation, the rise of order, leadership, and new vision. The storm had passed, but its memory would shape the future, and as the stars shone again over the silent stones of Göbekli Tepe, the earth itself seemed to whisper that even in times of shadow, humanity always finds its way back to the light. The earth was quiet after the long age of hardship. The rains had returned, the rivers had found their rhythm, and the seasons once again whispered their familiar songs. But humanity, the children of the sacred hill, were no longer the same. They had learned to survive. Now they would learn to transform. In the valleys once scarred by drought, new life began to bloom. Crops grew strong in the soil that people had tamed with patience and care. The old fear of hunger started to fade, replaced by a bold idea that humankind could shape its own destiny. This was the dawn of the age of transformation, when the descendants of Göbekli Tepe stepped beyond survival and into mastery. In every direction, the land began to change. Forests were cleared for villages. Riverbanks blossomed with farms. Stones were stacked into walls, and walls into homes. Where once people followed the wild herds, they now raised their own, goats, sheep, and cattle that grazed peacefully beneath the morning sun. The world that had once belonged only to nature was now shared with humankind, and at the heart of this change stood one idea: knowledge. People began to notice patterns, the way stars mark the time to plant, the way water flowed best through narrow channels, the way clay could be shaped, fired, and turned into vessels that lasted a lifetime. Slowly, bit by bit, wisdom gathered like dew on the grass of dawn. Tools became sharper, houses stronger, communities larger. No longer were they just survivors of a crisis. They were creators. But as villages grew, life became more complex. Someone had to decide how to share the water, when to plant the crops, and how to resolve disputes. And so, among the farmers, hunters, and builders, new kinds of people emerged. Leaders. They were not kings yet, nor warriors. They were chosen for their wisdom, for their ability to listen and guide. Around them gathered councils of elders, dreamers, and priests who still remembered the stories of the sacred hill, of Göbekli Tepe, the place where humankind had first reached toward the heavens. Under their guidance, rituals evolved once more. Temples began to rise again, not in the image of the great stone circles, but smaller, humbler, woven into the life of the people. The gods were no longer distant. They had become part of daily life. Every grain of wheat sown, every pot of water drawn, every spark of fire lit was an offering of gratitude. As people worked, they discovered something profound. They could improve upon their world. They began to experiment with fire, metal, and clay. They created ornaments from copper, painted with natural pigments, and built ovens that could bake both bread and pottery. Trade, too, blossomed again. From distant lands, caravans began to travel, carrying obsidian, salt, and precious stones. Words became more than sounds. They became the first symbols of writing, etched into wet clay or carved into bone. Though still primitive, these marks were the first steps toward language written by human hands, the beginning of history itself. Every symbol told a story of who they were, what they believed, and how far they had come from their ancestors on the Hill of Dawn. With prosperity came order. Roads were laid between settlements. Agreements were made between tribes. People began to count, not just the seasons, but the flow of grain, the number of animals, and the hands that work the land. And from these simple acts of counting came a quiet revolution, the birth of administration. For the first time, humanity could record and plan its future. The chaos of the wild was giving way to the rhythm of civilization. The world was no longer ruled by nature alone. It was being guided by human will. Yet even as progress filled the land, whispers of the old world lingered. Some elders still spoke of the great stones buried beneath the soil, the forgotten temples of the ancestors. They said that those stones held secrets, that they were built not just by human hands, but with knowledge from the stars. Many dismissed these tales as myths, but the stories endured, passed from fire to fire, heart to heart. Because deep down, humanity remembered. They were not just builders of earth, but seekers of meaning. And though the sacred hill slept beneath layers of time and dust, its spirit had not faded. It lived on in every hand that shaped clay, in every eye that gazed at the stars, in every heart that still wondered why. As centuries passed, the descendants of Göbekli Tepe became the foundation of something greater. Their innovations spread across the land, inspiring new civilizations that would one day be called Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Their hands had lit the torch of progress, and the flame began to travel far beyond Anatolia. But every transformation brings a new challenge. As humanity grew in power, it began to ask questions that would define the next era. Who should rule? Who should lead? What does it mean to possess power? The answers to these questions would shape the next chapter of human destiny. The people of the dawn had changed the world, but now the world would begin to change them. The story of humankind had begun as a whisper in the wind, a small gathering of people beneath the stars, guided by instinct and wonder. But by the time the age of transformation had passed, that whisper had become a voice, clear, determined, and powerful. The children of Göbekli Tepe, the people of the dawn, had built more than villages and farms. They had built the foundations of civilization itself. Yet, as new cultures rose across the lands, in the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, along the shining Nile and by the distant Indus River, few remembered their name. Their stones had been buried by time, their rituals forgotten by memory, but their influence, like the roots of an ancient tree, ran deep beneath the surface of history. In the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, a new world began to take shape. People built cities of clay and reed, carved symbols into tablets, and offered prayers to gods who looked down from the heavens. They called this place Sumer, the first great civilization. Yet, if one looked closely, echoes of Göbekli Tepe could still be found. The idea of sacred temples, of towering monuments that linked earth and sky, was not new. It had begun thousands of years earlier on that ancient Anatolian hill. The Sumerians built ziggurats of brick where their ancestors had once raised pillars of stone. Even their gods, the divine beings who ruled the winds, rain, and stars, felt like distant descendants of the older spirits once honored at Göbekli Tepe. It was as if the ancient faith had not vanished, but evolved, transformed into new languages, new forms, new beliefs. Civilization had changed its face, but its soul still carried the memory of the first awakening. From Sumer to Egypt, from the Indus to the Mediterranean, one truth began to spread. Knowledge is the greatest gift of the gods. The people of the dawn had once watched the stars for signs. Now, their descendants studied them with precision, mapping constellations and recording the rhythm of time. From these observations came calendars, agriculture, and navigation. Trade routes stretched farther than ever before, reaching mountains, deserts, and seas. And along those roads, not just goods but ideas traveled: how to build, how to worship, how to rule. Every new civilization was a branch of the same tree, nourished by roots that reached back to that sacred place of beginnings. But the most mysterious part of their legacy was not their monuments or inventions. It was their knowledge of meaning, their understanding that the world was not just physical, but spiritual. In ancient myths, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, there were always stories of wise ones who came from the east, bearing knowledge of the heavens, teaching people how to farm, measure, and heal. They were described as shining ones, builders of the first temples, or those who remembered the time before memory. Some believed these were travelers, descendants of the Göbekli Tepe people who had carried their wisdom into new lands. Others said they were merely symbols, the personification of humanity's growing awareness. Whichever was true, one thing was certain. The spark that began in Anatolia had not died. It had spread, quietly, invisibly, shaping the destiny of countless peoples. As centuries turned into millennia, the world grew louder, grander, and more complex. Empires rose and fell. Kings built monuments greater than any before. But in the songs of priests, in the lines of sacred texts, and in the patterns of ancient art, the same old message whispered, "We come from the same dawn." The symbols once carved into the stones of Göbekli Tepe reappeared in strange places, in Egyptian temples, Sumerian tablets, and even in faraway megaliths of Europe. Circles, vultures, serpents, and stars, signs that spoke of a language older than words. To most, they were decoration. To the few who remembered, they were the echoes of origin, fragments of a truth humanity had nearly forgotten. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the people of the dawn was their vision, the belief that the world of humans and the world of the divine were not separate, but connected, that through creation, art, and understanding, humanity could touch the sacred. That belief became the heartbeat of civilization itself. From temples to cathedrals, from rituals to philosophy, every act of seeking meaning was a reflection of that ancient wisdom, that we are part of something vast and eternal. Even as technology advanced, even as the world changed, that desire to connect, to understand, to reach beyond, it never left us. It was written into the very fabric of who we are. By the time Göbekli Tepe was finally buried, thousands of years had passed. The stones were covered in soil and silence. The people who built them were gone, their names lost to the wind. But sometimes forgetting is not the end. It is the beginning of mystery. The world would rediscover those stones one day, long after their builders' bones had turned to dust. And when they were uncovered again, they would change everything humanity thought it knew about its own past. For in those ancient carvings lay the proof that civilization did not begin in Mesopotamia or Egypt. It began, long before, with a people whose memory had been hidden beneath the earth. The first architects, the first dreamers, the first storytellers of humankind. They were the ones who lit the fire of civilization, and though the centuries tried to bury them, their light still shines. In us. The earth kept its secrets well. For thousands upon thousands of years, the stones of Göbekli Tepe slept beneath layers of dust and silence. The wind passed over them. The rain carved the soil, and the roots of wild grass wove themselves through cracks that had once been carved by human hands. Civilizations rose and fell above its buried heart. Sumer, Egypt, Greece, Rome, each believing itself the first to awaken the light of human reason. Yet, beneath them all, the true beginning of the human story lay hidden, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. That moment came, not in legend, not in prophecy, but in 1994, when a man with a shovel brushed aside a stone in the hills of southeastern Turkey. And in that instant, history itself changed. The man's name was Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist. He was not looking for a civilization. No one imagined one could exist so far back in time. He was simply following a rumor of strange stones on a barren hill called Göbekli Tepe, meaning the Potbelly Hill. But what he uncovered was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Beneath the soil lay massive T-shaped pillars, carved with the images of animals, foxes, vultures, snakes, wild boars, all arranged in circles like an ancient temple. And when carbon dating revealed their age, scholars were stunned. The stones were over 11,000 years old, thousands of years older than the pyramids, older even than the idea of writing itself. The world had believed civilization began with the invention of farming, around 6,000 years before Christ. But here stood proof that long before plows touched the earth, people had gathered to build something sacred, together. Humanity had not been born from cities. Cities had been born from humanity's longing for meaning. Göbekli Tepe shattered the old story of our past. Before, historians had imagined early humans as simple hunter-gatherers, primitive, surviving day by day. But these carvings told another story, of artists, architects, and visionaries. How could people without metal, without wheels, without beasts of burden move stones weighing tons? How could they plan such a place, with symmetry, astronomy, and purpose? It was as if a forgotten chapter of human history had been torn from the book and buried, waiting for us to find it when we were ready to understand. And perhaps that is exactly what happened. Each pillar seemed to speak in symbols, vultures carrying circles in their claws, foxes leaping across the stone, serpents winding around the edges. What did they mean? No one truly knows. Some believe they represented constellations, the first map of the stars. Others think they told stories of life and death, of the soul's journey beyond the mortal world. And some whisper that they were messages from those who first tried to explain the mystery of existence. Whatever the truth, Göbekli Tepe stood as proof that before humans built cities, they built belief. Before we organized kingdoms, we organized faith. We reached toward the invisible, and that reaching became the seed of everything we are. When modern eyes looked upon the carvings, something ancient stirred in the human heart. We recognized those shapes, not the animals, but the intent. The same desire that still drives us to build monuments, write stories, and look up at the stars. Because in every age humanity has sought the same thing, to understand why we are here. Göbekli Tepe is not just a ruin, it is a mirror. It reflects the part of us that has never changed, the dreamer, the seeker, the creator. And in rediscovering it, we rediscovered ourselves. Today, scientists still study its mysteries. Every excavation uncovers more questions than answers. Who built it? Why did they bury it? And how did such knowledge arise in an age when the world was thought to be wild and empty? Some believe Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, not destroyed, but preserved, as if its builders knew the world would forget and wanted to protect the memory until humankind was ready to remember again. If so, they succeeded, because now we see them not as shadows of the past, but as the first light of civilization, the ancestors of every culture, every invention, every dream. Their stones still stand, silent but eternal, and every sunrise that touches them feels like a reunion between the ancient and the modern, the beginning and the now. In the end, the story of Göbekli Tepe is not just about a lost civilization. It is the story of us, of how far we've come, and how deeply our roots reach into the dawn of time. The people of the sacred hill are gone, but their spirit lives in every act of creation, in every song sung to the stars, in every temple, painting, and idea that dares to touch the infinite. For we, too, are people of the dawn. The same light that shone on those ancient stones still burns within us, the light of curiosity, of imagination, of wonder. And perhaps that is what they wanted us to remember all along, that the beginning was never lost. It was only waiting, beneath the dust, beneath the noise, beneath the centuries, for us to find it again. For thousands of years, the stones of Göbekli Tepe slept beneath the earth, waiting for us to remember. Now we know. Civilization did not begin with kings or empires. It began with dreamers, men and women who looked to the stars and asked why. They built not for power, but for meaning. And though time buried their names, their spirit still lives. In every city we raise, every question we ask, every spark of wonder that refuses to fade. We are their legacy. We are the children of the dawn. If this story moved you, subscribe for more forgotten histories. Turn on the bell so you never miss the next discovery. And share this story with those who still believe that the past holds the key to who we truly are. Because the more we uncover our beginnings, the clearer we see our future.